Have you ever stopped to wonder how these massive companies, the ones with global reach, protect their most valuable secrets? It's not just a fancy firewall. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the master blueprint they all use. It's called Information Security Governance. Let's dive right in.
No, really, think about it for a second. How does a company with thousands of employees keep its secret sauce, all of its customer data, its private financial records? How do they keep all of that safe from hackers, from competitors, or even just from a simple mistake by an employee?
You might think the answer is all about the tech. These impenetrable firewalls, super complex passwords, and cutting-edge antivirus software. And yeah, that stuff is definitely part of the equation. But the real secret, the thing that holds it all together, is something much, much bigger. It's a strategic blueprint for the entire organization. So to really get why this blueprint is so important, we first have to wrap our heads around the core problem. And it all comes down to the dual nature of information itself. It's both your most valuable asset and, at the same time, your biggest liability.
Look, in the world we live in now, information is basically the lifeblood of a company. It's what gives you an edge. But that information is everywhere. It's flowing through tons of different systems, devices, you name it. And with global competition and this tangled web of regulations, the stakes are just incredibly high. Every bit of data you have is a potential goldmine, for sure, but it's also a potential landmine just waiting to go off.
So, how on earth do you navigate that maze? Well, the answer comes down to one powerful concept: governance. This is the high-level strategic plan for protecting all that critical information.
Here's probably the best way to picture it. Information security governance isn't about laying the individual bricks, that's your firewalls and your antivirus software. Now, governance is the master blueprint for the entire skyscraper. It dictates the whole design, what materials to use, the standards you have to meet, and makes sure the final building is strong, stable, and actually does what it was designed to do.
Now, this is a super important distinction to make. Governance is not the same thing as management. Governance sets the destination. It's the leadership team looking at the map and deciding where the organization needs to go. Management, they're the ones actually building the road to get there. They execute the plan day in and day out. So one decides the what and the other handles the how. And here's another common mix-up. People use IT security and information security like they're the same thing, but they're really not. IT security is focused on the technology, the servers, the networks, the hardware. But information security, that's way broader. It's about protecting the information itself, and it doesn't matter where that information lives, whether it's on a server, in a paper file, or even just inside someone's head. Okay, so we've got this master blueprint called governance. But a blueprint's pretty useless if nobody knows who's the architect, who's the engineer, and who's supposed to be on the construction crew. So who's actually in charge of all this? Right. In the corporate world, you can't just hope people figure out their roles. To avoid confusion and make sure nothing important falls through the cracks, big organizations use this really powerful tool called a RASI chart. It's a simple but brilliant way to map out exactly who's supposed to do what. Let's just break this down real quick. R stands for responsible. These are the people who are actually doing the work, the ones with their hands on the keyboard. A is for accountable. This is the one person, and listen, there can only be one A, who is ultimately on the hook for the success of that task. C is for consulted. These are your experts, the people you loop in for advice. And finally, I is for informed. These are the folks who just need to be kept up to date on what's happening.
And here is what one of those charts looks like in the real world. Now, don't worry about trying to read every single box here. The big takeaway is just to see how, for every single major decision, from setting strategy to writing policies, this chart gives everyone involved a very clear role. There's no guesswork. It's literally a map of accountability.
All right, so we know who is on the team. Now, let's dig into how they actually create that security blueprint. How does this strategy actually come to life?
Well, it's a pretty deliberate three-step process. First, you have to define your destination. What does good security actually look like for your specific company? That's called the desired state. Second, you build a roadmap to get there, a clear set of projects and initiatives. And third, and this is key, you don't try to reinvent the wheel. You use established, proven frameworks to guide the entire process. And defining that desired state is about so much more than just technology. A really strong security program is built on a foundation of clear policies, sure, but it's also about building a culture where people are aware of security. It's about having the right people with the right skills, not just having the right servers and apps. I mean, you can have the best tech in the world, but it's totally useless if your company culture just doesn't support it. Okay, so what about that third step, using frameworks? This pyramid here shows how it all fits together. Way up at the top, you got broad regulations like Sarbanes-Oxley or HIPAA, things that protect investors or patient health information. They set the high-level goals. Then, as you move down the pyramid, everything gets more and more specific, from governance frameworks that structure your whole program, down to control objectives, all the way to the specific technical controls that an engineer is actually going to implement. Each layer guides the one right below it.
So we have a plan, and we have people to execute it. But there's one final, absolutely critical piece to this whole puzzle. How do you know if any of this is actually working? How do you make sure the plan is effective and delivering real value to the business? The answer is actually pretty simple. You measure it. Because without metrics, you're really just guessing. Measurement is what creates accountability. It's what lets you track your progress, and at the end of the day, it's how you prove to the business that all this time and money being spent on security is actually worth it. And what's really important is that you have to measure two different kinds of things: the final outcome and the performance that actually gets you to that outcome. A key goal indicator, or KGI, tells you if you hit your target. Like, are we officially compliant with a certain regulation, yes or no? A key performance indicator, or KPI, measures the process. For instance, how many of our systems did we test this month? You absolutely need both to know if you're really on track. Which brings us to one last and, I think, really important question. After you've built the blueprint, you've assigned all the roles, and you've set up your measurements, are you ever actually done? Is that digital fortress of yours finally finished? And the answer to that is a hard no. Good information security governance is not a project that has a start date and an end date. It's a continuous, living, breathing process. It's about constantly evaluating, constantly adjusting, and constantly aligning your security efforts with the ever-changing needs of the business, always with that goal of protecting and creating value. And that is the real secret to building a fortress that can actually stand the test of time.